Personally, I do enjoy reading literature. I think it gives you a really great opportunity just to escape from everyday life and just sort of go into your own little fantasy world.
I definitely enjoy reading literature, and it's something I've chosen to study. And I think I do it because I love reading literature in context and understanding how a specific piece of literature has influenced a community or society or even the world at a given time, and the reasons for that and the consequences.
I do enjoy reading literature a lot, so much so that I do it for my degree. But as far as leisure reading goes, I'm largely into fantasy fiction and science fiction, that kind of stuff, because I feel like the capacity for creativity in those fields is the broadest of all the genres.
I do read a lot for school and stuff like that, but I also try and fit in a lot of reading for pleasure as well. I definitely try and fit in at least one reading session for myself a week. So I'd say I read a lot.
If I could, I'd probably read most of the time. But especially when you go on holiday, it's always nice to take a pile of good books with you. And just at the weekends, to set aside some time for yourself, it's always good to do some reading.
I read every day. I love reading, probably sort of 3 to 4 hours a day. Yeah, lots.
I like to read in my evenings because it's like after a busy day, it's kind of nice to just disappear into like a fictional world or just read up on things, and it's time to just enjoy yourself basically before you go to sleep ready for the next day.
One of the best books I've read was a book by Mallory Blackman. In fact, it's made into a series, Noughts and Crosses. I particularly enjoyed it because it's set in a sort of fictional world that you can't really relate to, but has so many aspects to deal with race which are applicable to the world in which we live in. And I think it challenged my perceptions of how you relate to each other in society, how we see race, and how it's affected the way that we grow up in a way that's still accessible because it is fictional.
One of the best books I've ever read is actually a book I read when I was quite young, and it's The Giver by Lois Lowry. And although it's quite a simple book, superficially, it's one that really makes someone reassess their perspective of the world. And it's one of the books that really made me want to read more similar books, and I think that is the mark of great literature.
I have a lot of favourite books. A book that I really like is A Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I love to reread it. I think it's my favourite because it's just such an interesting story and it really draws you in. And it shows just the different levels of humanity and the different ways you can be a person with 3 main characters and their different storylines. And it's just a very exciting, interesting read with a lot of plot twists.
Well, I definitely couldn't talk about one book. I'm a bit too picky for that. But I'd have to say a series of books that really inspired me is a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket. They just influenced me a lot from the point of view of my tastes and from what I like in literature and in film.
One of the books that's influenced me the most in my life is perhaps one of the first books that I ever read, or had read to me in fact, Aesop's Fables. I just thought there was such an interesting way of learning about morality and doing the right and wrong thing in situations. And that's something that's really stuck with me, throughout my whole life.
What's inspired me the most is probably Jean-Paul Sartre's Road to Freedom. I read it when I was 14 and it really sort of changed my perspective. I think probably from sort of a more childish one to a more adult one, I think.
I identify with Roald Dahl's character, the BFG, because as a child I always appreciated the way that he creates dreams for the children. And when I grew up, as I was growing up, I wanted to be a writer, and I always imagined that I would create fiction in the same way he creates his dreams, with different ingredients, and that's always the way I envisioned artistic creation.
I think certainly as a teen, I identified most with Prince Caspian from the Chronicles of Narnia, because of his role as a sort of outcast teen, and he's just a very empathetically written character.
I think that a character I've always identified with personally is Maggie Tulliver from George Eliot's A Mill on the Floss. It's a story about her growing up, and I read it when I was quite young. And I always identified with how she was a bit of a dreamer, and she loved to read books like I did. And it's a story of her family and her sibling, and it really reminded me of my own life, and I've always loved that book because of that.